how much is a studio quality headphone worth to you? What's your budget and how much influence will you let hype drive your decision? Today, I want to focus on two products that are the same price, purportedly provide the same type of sound, are made by American companies, and whose target audience include both professionals and casual audiophiles. Of course, as the title says, we speak of the Avantone Planar and the Audeze LCD-1. Both headphones are $400. Both aim for neutral sound. Both are targeted to professionals and audiophiles alike. Yet, which one is a better purchase? It's a David versus Goliath story when you compare these headphones side by side. They could not be more dissimilar. The LCD-1 is a plastic headphone. Plastic dominates the outer shell, the driver housing, and the headphone is a bit wobbly. The plastic is fine and perfectly in line with the type of materials used for significantly cheaper headphones. That's probably why Audeze includes a large, bulky protective case. The Planar, on the other hand, is metal. I cannot see or feel any plastic bits. It is sturdy and feels robust. Compared to the LCD-1, the Planar is like a Tonka truck to Audeze's Mazda Miata. The movement of the ear cups is basically similar. Both headphones will more or less conform to the shape of your head, but the ear cup size is obviously different. Audeze went with small and Avantone went with large. This has a big influence on comfort. The larger size of the Planar means that your ears sit inside the ear cups. The LCD-1, on the other hand, is more an on-ear headphone, wherein the top and bottom of your ears might get pinched. Regardless, I think anyone with average-sized ears will find their ears do hit inside of the ear cups on the LCD-1. Padding on the headphones is also different. The LCD-1 uses sponge-like padding on the ear cups and headband. It is laughably subpar. It does not feel like memory foam and certainly is not as comfortable as real memory foam. The headband padding is nothing to be proud of, as it feels more like an inflated air mattress than foam. The Planar has plush ear pads that remind me of the stock DT880 ear pads. The Planar does not have headband padding, but the weight is so well distributed that the fit is not uncomfortable. Obviously, your mileage will vary. Here's another humorous aspect. In my original LCD-1 reviews, I spoke of how much I liked the cable design, that you could plug either jack into either ear cup. I said that the cable was the right length and build, and I still believe that. But Avantone has done a little better. You see, the Planar uses the exact same type of cable as the LCD-1. The Planar's cable has Kevlar-type sheathing and is nowhere near as pliable as the LCD-1 cable. But the pinout design is the same. The cables are swappable. I confirmed this for Heart Audio cables, so now they know what to do if you ask them for an Avantone Planar cable. But here's the kicker. The Planar has two types of cables, one standard and the other a mono. The mono cable has simply one jack on either end. You can plug the headphone jack into either ear cup and get stereo sound. It's a pretty cool feature. One thing that professionals sometimes complain about is headphones that don't have a single cable input. They prefer to have one-sided cables like on the DT770, 880, or 990. Some companies do make detachable single-sided cables like the Neumann NDH20, but the NDH20 has its cable insert on the right ear cup when the standard way is to put it on the left ear cup. With the Planar's design, you can plug the single cable into either ear cup, left or right, and it won't matter. Look at that. Real, meaningful, helpful features. Overall, there is no doubt that the Avantone Planar has superior build, comfort, and professional features. The LCD-1's folding design is a total gimmick. If you put the headphone into its case, then you'll add the girth back. If you throw the headphones into your bag without protection, then you'll be left wondering if the LCD-1 will survive to your next destination. Avantone says that the Planar was designed for mix engineers, musicians, podcasters, live streamers, and hi-fi enthusiasts. Avantone says that the Planar is tuned for a flat response. Avantone does not make any other specific claims, but they mention that Planar drivers provide amazing accuracy, high-end detail, clarity, natural bass, and response time. Some review sites took this general statement from Avantone's website and claimed these words apply to the Planar, and I don't think that's really accurate. I found no marketing material or statements on the website which directly explain what the Planar should sound like. Consequently, the only unambiguous promise that Avantone is making is that the Planar is flat sounding, and I take this to mean that the headphones are neutral. Audeze likes to make big, bold claims. It's their thing. I'm going to list all the promises Audeze emphatically says about the LCD-1. Here we go. That it is comfortable, convenient, has premium sound, enhanced transparency and soundstage, unparalleled sonic detail and accuracy, deep, rich bass with low audible distortion. It will provide music in its purest form, the way it was meant to be heard, engineered for critical listening. It is a critical tool for anyone who values pure, neutral, and accurate sound with pinpoint stereo imaging. If you're overwhelmed by all these guarantees, I can empathize. Audeze likes to crush the doubt reasonable people have by making unambiguous claims about their products. For this test, I paired each headphone with various gear. I used an A/B switch to jump back and forth. I plugged the headphones into the Earman TR amp, the RME 80i2 DAC, and the Monolith THX desktop. The Tramp is fairly neutral with an analytical tilt. The RME is neutral. The THX desktop is a little more analytical than the Tramp. All three devices can easily power both headphones. I used Amazon Music HD. I volume matched. Before we get into the test, I think we should define what neutral means. Both companies throw that word around without defining it. In my view, neutral means that there is no particular emphasis or de-emphasis to the music. That is, the bass is not pushed up, the treble is not rolled off, the grain is not elevated. Our goal is to find out which of these headphones sounds closest to neutral, that is, which headphone does not emphasize or underemphasize any particular frequency range. Furthermore, neutral has nothing to do with detail. A headphone can be neutral yet provide lackluster detail, or it could provide tremendous detail but not be neutral. Consequently, when we speak of neutral, we are discussing only the sound signature. The issue of detail retrieval will be addressed as a separate section. There are some noticeable differences in bass between these headphones. On Mountains by Hans Zimmer, the LCD-1 could not fully recreate the sub-bass rumble that prevails throughout the song from beginning to end. The transients is very fast, but the overall volume of the rumble is not sufficient. There is some melding between sub-bass and mid-bass, and details are not quite present. When the crescendo hits at the middle of the song, the organ cut right through the mix and overshadowed all the other instruments. The rolling thunder effect was audible, and it too interacted with the other instruments, drowning them out. Separation of instruments was lackluster, creating an amalgam of sounds. Everything sounded shoulder to shoulder, and the only difference was that the organ was louder than the other instruments. The vocals that start at 3 minutes and 10 seconds were audible, but they did heavily meld with the rest of the mix. On the Planar, the sub-bass was just as quick as on the LCD-1, but there appeared to be just a tiny bit more presence of the rumble effect. I went back and forth to make sure it was not volume mismatching and confirmed that the volumes were matched. The Planar simply has more sub-bass presence than the LCD-1, though not by a huge leaps and bounds. When the crescendo hit, the organ cut through the mix and did not meld nearly as much as it had on the LCD-1. The rolling thunder effect was much more controlled on the Planar, and it was easier to hear other instruments in the mix. Indeed, the thunderous effect has an oscillation, one which the LCD-1 distorted. Imagine standing 20 feet from a train track as a train rumbles by. You can hear and feel the sound. Now imagine standing 10 feet away, and that sound is louder, boomier. That's the difference between these two phones. The LCD-1's presentation of the sub-bass lacked detail and texture. The vocals that start at 3 minutes and 10 seconds were clearer on the Planar than on the LCD-1. Whereas the LCD-1 melded the vocals with other instruments, the Planar allowed them to be a little clearer. On Conquer by Overwork, the Planar accurately recreated the rolling marble effect at the beginning of the song. I could hear each individual drum strike. Mid-bass impact was hard and fast, though not bloated or overwhelming. There was some melding between one drum strike and the next, but there was no distortion or harshness. The synth sounded neutral and did not appear to be fatiguing. I could hear different drums in different parts of the ear cups, some closer than others. The LCD-1 did not accurately recreate the rolling marble effect. It sounded more muffled than on the Planar. Mid-bass impact sounded blunted on the LCD-1, whereas on the Planar the impact was a little harder. The LCD-1 tended to meld one drum strike with the next, similar to what the Planar did. However, where the Planar retained clarity, the LCD-1 had a veiled effect, as if there was a bed sheet draped over the speaker. Sounds came through but were always less clear than they were on the Planar. The synth sounded about the same between these two headphones. I played several hip-hop songs including Pure Water, Uproar, New Patek, and Reel It In. The LCD-1 never fully recreated the sub-bass. Ever. Hip-hop songs are supposed to have a subwoofer effect, but the LCD-1 did not provide that in any of these songs. Mid-bass was present, but as on every other song, the mid-bass sounded just a bit veiled and blunted. Vocals were easily 2 steps ahead and had the requisite sparkle. There was just a bit too much sparkle in some cases. This is consistent with the vast majority of Audeze headphones I have heard, that the vocals seem a bit emphasized compared to the rest of the frequency range. On the Planar, these songs had a different presentation, and it was slight but noticeable. The sub-bass was more elevated, closer to neutral than on the LCD-1. The reverberation was slightly longer. The sub-bass and mid-bass melded slightly, but the mid-bass impact was not veiled, unlike on the LCD-1. Vocals were clear and 1 to 2 steps ahead of the mix. The sparkle was there, but not the accentuated type of the LCD-1. Whereas the LCD-1 made the vocals in these songs stand out, push forward, the Planar had a bit more control, allowing the vocals to be just 1 step ahead and not in your face. The clarity of bass instruments became obvious when I played Bim Bam Smash from the Bourne Supremacy soundtrack. On the Planar, each drum strike was clear and precise, but still had slight melding from one strike to the next. The electric guitar was separate from the drums. I could hear at least 3 different drums in the mix, each with its own tonality. On the LCD-1, the drums melded and sounded more veiled, shrouded, less clear. The electric guitar melded more than on the Planar and was not nearly as clear as it was on the Planar. The Planar had a crispness to the guitar that the LCD-1 simply lacked. Moreover, there is a mid-bass slam at 1 minute and 15 seconds into the song. That drum strike is hard, fast, accurate on the Planar, and on the LCD-1 it is muffled by comparison. The Planar makes it feel as if the drum is only a few feet away, and the LCD-1 makes it appear as if something is draped over the drums. Overall, neither headphone is truly accurate with bass. Both roll off sub-bass to one degree or another, but the LCD-1 rolls it off more. Bass instruments tend to meld on both headphones, but the LCD-1 adds more muddiness on top. The differences are not necessarily huge, but definitely noticeable in A/B testing. Slight perturbations of drums is more clear on the Planar. Separation of instruments is better on the Planar. Mid-bass impact is harder on the Planar. The mids are also different between these headphones, and this might be make it or break it for some. In Orla Gartlett's song Why Am I Like This, there is some natural grain and sibilance recorded into the track. On the LCD-1, Orla's sibilance was accentuated just a few decibels. It was easier than what I've heard on other Audeze headphones, but still not neutral and not accurate. The grain in her voice was recreated accurately, however. The guitar and drums melded, and it was difficult to hear the guitar at times. The guitar's timbre seemed to be correct, but it was sometimes lost in the mix. At 2 minutes and 45 seconds when the backup vocalist sings, she is in the right ear cup. Her voice is obvious, but does meld significantly with other instruments. On the Planar, Orla's sibilance was neutral. It was audible and not pushed forward. In comparison, the LCD-1 simply sounded harsher. The grain in Orla's voice was mostly recreated, but if slightly smoothed out on the Planar. The overall experience was smoother and more neutral on the Planar than on the LCD-1. The guitar was more easily separated from the drums on the Planar. The timbre was correct. What I noticed going back and forth is that the bass guitar melded significantly on the LCD-1, but remained fairly separate on the Planar. Instruments were clearer on the Planar. This included the backup vocalist, who was just a little easier to perceive on the Planar than on the LCD-1. In Want You Back by Haim, the Planar accurately recreated the primary vocalist sibilance without pushing it forward. At 10 seconds into the song, the primary singer has a gravelly pitch to the word we, and it came across perfectly naturally. The backup vocalists were clear, one in the right ear cup, the other in the left. The piano, guitars, and drums all had accurate timbre. Instruments melded slightly but never sounded bloated. When the entire mix played at maximum volume, the backup vocalists melded, but if I paid very close attention, I could hear them in the background. The LCD-1 pushed the primary vocalist sibilants several decibels forward, creating a harsher experience. When the gravelly pitch of the word "we" happened, it was far more muddy, much less obvious, more muffled on the LCD-1. This was a big detail that the LCD-1 shrouded. The two backup vocalists sounded clear and distinct at the beginning of the song, but began to meld sooner than they had on the Planar. On the Planar, the tonalities melded around 55 seconds into the mix, but on the LCD-1, that melding started around 40 seconds into the song. When the entire mix played at maximum, all the vocalists melded and it was not possible to hear the individual tonalities. I thought I heard one of the backup vocalists in the left ear cup, but she was much less obvious than she had been on the Planar. On superposition by Young the Giant, the LCD-1 properly recreated the timbre of the ukulele and drums, but the bass guitar was muted and lost somewhere in the mix. The primary vocalist sibilance was elevated just slightly and was not neutral. There was also a bit of grain that seemed a notch too emphasized, but it was not harsh. There is a backup vocalist in the song, but the LCD-1 never presented him. The vocals sounded about 2 steps ahead of the mix. On the Planar, the ukulele, drums, and bass guitar all sounded accurate. The bass guitar had more presence on the Planar than on the LCD-1. The primary vocalist sounded smoother on the Planar, and his sibilance was not accentuated. The grain was not elevated. He sounded perfectly neutral. The backup vocalist was again difficult to perceive on the Planar just as on the LCD-1. The vocalists take breaths between 1 minute and 1 minute and 20 seconds of the song, and those intakes of breaths are clearer, more obvious on the Planar than on the LCD-1. Indeed, the LCD-1 seemed to muffle those breaths and recreated them more as sibilants than as sharp intakes of breathing. The differences here were stark. The Planar is simply a more neutral headphone for mids. The LCD-1 accentuates sibilance and grain. It pushes vocals forward and makes them sound thinner in comparison to the Planar. There is a bit of harshness to the vocals presentation from the LCD-1, something that the Planar simply does not do. Details get muffled or lost altogether on the LCD-1. Instruments have slightly better, clearer separation on the Planar than on the LCD-1. There is a slight difference between these headphones regarding treble. On Scherzo for X-Wings, the Planar allowed the horns and brass to cut through the mix. They had the appropriate amount of energy without sounding harsh. The timbre was accurate, the timpani in the background, and was audible, though not overpowering. I could hear group sets but not individual instruments. Some instruments appeared in the extreme left, some the extreme right, some center, some closer, in essence giving the impression that the orchestra was arrayed in a semicircle in front of me. No instrument was harsh or peaky, and nothing sounded muffled. The LCD-1 added just a tiny bit more energy to the brass and horns compared to the Planar. Instruments appeared to have the same type of timbre as on the Planar. The timpani was more subdued on the LCD-1, however. I could hear group sets, but not individual instruments. The LCD-1 did not give the same placement of instruments as the Planar. Indeed, the LCD-1 recreated instruments as either left or right ear cup, and everything was shoulder to shoulder. These instruments did not sound shrouded or muffled. On Flight from the City by Johan Johansson, the LCD-1 made the piano sound as if it was about 8 feet from me. The bassier notes were underemphasized. Notes had fast decay. The cello was clear and smooth and melded slightly with the piano notes. There is an electric buzz effect throughout the song, but the LCD-1 rarely showed it. When it was heard, it was usually muffled. The creaking of the pianist's wooden bench and the sound of the cello being shifted were both veiled and muffled, though audible. The Planar recreated the piano about 8 feet from me as well. The bassier notes had slightly more emphasis than the LCD-1. All notes had fast decay, just like as on the LCD-1. The electric buzz sound was more easily audible and clearer on the Planar. The cello was a little smoother on the Planar and had a bit more separation and clarity than it had on the LCD-1. The sound of the bench and shifting cello were a little more obvious, clearer on the Planar. On Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the Planar recreated the drum kit in the left ear cup, the piano in the right, the saxophone dead center, and the bass in the background. All instruments melded slightly but retained their individual tonalities. The saxophone was smooth and accurate. You can sit and listen to all 4 instruments concentrate on one and hear the other 3 doing their own thing. I could hear when the drummer hit the hi-hat or the cymbal, each with its own tonality. Moreover, I could hear how the drummer wasn't perfectly hitting the cymbals, and there was a variation in volume with successive hits. The LCD-1 recreated the placement of the instruments the same as the Planar. The saxophone had a bit more grain on the LCD-1 than on the Planar, but it was not harsh. The bass was harder to find in the mix than on the Planar. Instruments melded a bit more on the LCD-1 than they had on the Planar. The LCD-1 recreated the cymbals and hi-hats similar to what I heard on the Planar, and I had a hard time telling the 2 headphones apart in this regard. Overall, the treble response was very close between these headphones. There are some differences here and there. Sometimes the Planar was more neutral, sometimes the distinction was so minute that it could be disregarded. Consequently, I would say that the Planar and the LCD-1 are very close to neutral in treble response, but the edge is to the Planar. Throughout this test, I have tried to explain the details I can hear. I will not repeat all of that, but will summarize my findings. The LCD-1 does not provide minute details and is in no way a critical headphone in this regard. It muffles details on every single occasion. Sometimes the differences in detail are minor, sometimes they are significant, but always the Planar rendered details more clearly. Some instruments are just lost in the mix. Take bass guitar or bass as an example. The LCD-1 rolls off those frequencies so much that if there are other instruments playing, you won't hear the bass guitar or bass. The sounds of electric buzzing, wood creaking, intakes of breaths, shifting of instruments, these never sound accurate on the LCD-1. Either such details are lost or muffled or pitched higher than they should be. The Planar is not a detailed headphone either, but it does not need to be since it doesn't pretend to be. You hear the same amount of details as on the LCD-1, except that the details are clearer. Neither headphone is anywhere close to the likes of the Focal Clear, HD800S, or the Austrian Audio Hi-X55. Those headphones are detail monsters. But the LCD-1 is not. It is entirely average in this regard, as is the Avantone Planar. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including children playing in the background, the sound of wind, rustling of tall grass, synth, piano, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps that I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The king of detailed retrieval in this test is the Focal Clear, which exhibits 18 footsteps in the first 60 seconds. The second place headphone in this test is the Hi-X55, which presented 14 to 15 footsteps in the first 60 seconds. Using this methodology, I tested the Planar and the LCD-1. The Planar demonstrated 8 to 9 footsteps. The LCD-1 demonstrated 7 footsteps. The major difference is that the LCD-1 always, without fail, without question, muffles the details. Both headphones are open back and theoretically should have similar soundstage, but that is not entirely the case. The LCD-1's soundstage is average at best. It is no better than that of the HD6XX or 660S. Indeed, often the headphone presents sound closer than what I hear on the Planar. The impression is that the LCD-1 is a more intimate headphone. The Planar, by contrast, has wider soundstage than the LCD-1. It is average to slightly above average. It does not have the soundstage of the Hi-Fi Mansandara, but it is noticeably wider than the LCD-1. The combination of wider soundstage, more clarity, and separation results in an experience that is clearly different between these two headphones. Both headphones promise neutral sound, and neither provides it completely. But that does not mean that the Planar and LCD-1 are equal. They are not. The Avantone Planar is by far the most neutral headphone I have ever heard. Its one drawback is the slight sub-bass roll-off. A few decibel EQ would solve that problem. In all other respects, the Planar is flat. The mids are natural and smooth without losing detail. The treble is well extended and accurate, and even the bass is very close to neutral. The mid-bass slam is fast and hard when the songs require it, and restrained, well controlled at all times. There is no harshness to be found on the Planar. Vocals sound as they should, and nothing jumps out to slap you in the face. This may sound boring to you, and in fact, I've had at least one person comment they found the Planar too boring before EQ. And I've had several people say that they love the Planar sound just as it is. Clearly, personal taste will have a lot to say in this. Nevertheless, flat, neutral headphones should not transform the music. They should merely deliver that experience as it was intended. The Planar, I think, does that better than any other headphone I've heard. On the other hand, the LCD-1 is a victim of Audeze's flamboyant, hyperbolic promises. Audeze cannot help itself in this regard. The LCD-1 does not have accurate bass reproduction. It rolls off the sub-bass, just like the Planar, but manages to still not provide the same amount of clarity that the Planar can. There is little separation between sub-bass and mid-bass. Mid-bass slam is blunted compared to the Planar. Mids sound unnatural, too forward of almost every song I heard. Female vocals are uncomfortably sibilant. Grain is accentuated just a little. Vocals generally sounded shouty, where it seemed like someone was singing directly into my eardrums. I have heard other Audeze headphones that perform much worse, so we could put this into context. Compared to the Planar, the LCD-1's mids are too forward. Treble is about the same as what I heard on the Planar, therefore fairly neutral on the LCD-1. But the overall picture is that the LCD-1 is not neutral. The lack of sub-bass, shouty, and unnatural mids, and mostly neutral treble results in a headphone that is not neutral. In the past, I have said that the LCD-1 is a smooth headphone, and it is. If you listen to male vocalists, orchestral pieces, or pop, the LCD-1 does sound quite pleasant. But when compared to a real neutral headphone, the LCD-1's failures become starkly obvious. Add to all of this the LCD-1's muffled nature, less than impressive soundstage, and average at best detail retrieval, and you start seeing a picture. The LCD-1 is a failure of its own marketing. The more I use the Avantone Planar, the more I believe it is indeed a good value. A lot of companies promise neutral sound, and here's a short list: AKG, Beyerdynamic, Sennheiser, Audeze, Focal, Neumann, and Sony, and none of these companies come close to delivering. Before the Planar, my go-to recommendation for neutral headphones was from Allo Audio. But now, after hearing the Planar, I think that the Allo Audio headphones have to take second place prize. Yes, the Planar could use a bass boost of a few EQ, but you can easily do that. And even without that bass EQ, you get sufficient sub-bass presence for most types of genres. Everything else about this headphone is neutral, or at least the closest I have ever heard. The build quality is excellent. The headphone is big and cumbersome, but that's hardly problematic if you intend to keep these headphones on your desk. The Planar is also among the most comfortable headphones I have tried. Some people may not like the size and weight, and truth be told, the LCD-1 is not a true competitor here either. I know that $400 is a lot of money, but I think you do get a lot in return. Now, you may not enjoy the sound signature if you're looking for a V-shaped sound, or believe that you need some excitement. But if you're willing to give the Planar a chance, then I suggest you listen for a few days before reaching judgment. It can be a little difficult at first to acclimate yourself to a neutral headphone when all you've ever heard is, well, not neutral. Then we turn to the LCD-1. Look, I will be blunt. The LCD-1 does not do anything Audeze promised. Think about the list of items Audeze promised, and I'll put them on screen. The LCD-1 is not comfortable. Your ears will not sit inside the ear cups without bending. The stupid convenience and folding design hype is all nonsense. You save about 1.5 inches total when you fold the headphones. You gain all of that back and add some more to it when you put the headphones in their necessary case. The LCD-1 has average sound quality, not premium, and certainly nothing to boast about. The headphone is not transparent, since the word means headphones are not supposed to add or delete the original audio. The problem is that the LCD-1 does both. You lose out on sub-bass and you get shouty, harsh female vocals. You get below average to average soundstage. It is no better than the HD660S or 650 or 6XX. The The LCD-1 hides details because of its muddled sound signature. Almost every single instrument seems a little veiled. Every song appeared less clear overall when compared to the Planar. The LCD-1 cannot recreate minute details, and the ones it did recreate were less clear than what they should have been. Audeze's boasting that the LCD-1 provides deep, rich bass is fascinatingly deceitful. Maybe what Audeze means is that the LCD-1 has been measured to reach deep into the bass frequencies, and that may be true, but what you actually hear is nowhere close to the actual promise. And finally, there are a couple of repetitive promises about the LCD-1 being for professionals and for critical listening, but I wouldn't bet on it. There is so much average about the LCD-1 that I cannot imagine any real professional spending $400 on this headphone. The LCD-1 does nothing that other headphones, cheaper headphones, cannot do better. If you want lots of detail, then look at the X55. If you want hard, impactful bass, look to the One More Triple Driver. If you want neutral, warm mids, look to the HT6XX. If you want neutral, then the Planar easily grinds the LCD-1 into the dust. I do not want to keep beating a dead horse. The LCD-1 is yet another attempt by Audeze to deceive less than cognizant audiophiles. Audeze's marketing team is very, very good. They make claims that are bold-faced lies, and nobody seems to care. When you throw money and special treatment at influential reviewers, I suppose you can expect preferential treatment. And that's what I see with the LCD-1. It has been given rather special kid glove treatment. You may very much enjoy the LCD-1, and I know I do. I use it regularly. But whether I like it is not relevant. That is the problem with a lot of reviews. It is perfectly agreeable to tell people that you like a headphone. But it is entirely different to claim that it is the best if you cannot and have not compared it and tested the claims. So, here's the bottom line. The LCD-1 is not value. It is definitely not worth $400. It is a plastic monstrosity that has sailed into audiophile circles on winds of hype. $250 is the appropriate price for this headphone, and not a penny more.